people at the back door please come in and stand up along the side of the room? As you can see, we're overbooked. There are some chairs along the side. You can take a chair or you can stand up. This room was, as you're going to hear from Mr. Zamperini, and as you heard yesterday, was originally the library. The acoustics are not meant for presentations, so I'm going to really need your cooperation in keeping the room quiet so that we can hear Mr. Zamperini, which is why you're all here. For those of you who were at the pep rally, you heard that Mr. Zamperini had a few problems here at school, and so he got involved in sports, and the successes he's had in life he attributes to a lot of it to Torrance High School and school spirit and the support and help of the friends that he made here at Torrance High School. I'm not going to tell you a lot about his story because I think it's so interesting. I'd like you to hear it from him. But remember, we need it to be very quiet today because there's so many people in here. At the end, you should have time for questions and answers. Okay? Mr. Zamperini.
Well, this is my school. I was a Tartar and I ended up a Trojan. I'm not really a native of California. Actually, I was born in Upper New York. My brother and I both had pneumonia, and the doctors told my mother, get your kids to California or they might die. And we both became runners. We moved to Long Beach, and there our house burnt down. My dad grabbed my brother and I and ran out the front door. My mother looking around for me and said, well, where's Louie? And he said, well, right there. She said, you brought out a pillow. So he ran back in the house, searched around in the smoke. He found me under the bed. By the time he got me out the front door, the porch collapsed and he badly burnt his legs. Also, while in Long Beach at the age of 4, I was challenged to a race down to the corner across the intersection. I was beaten badly, but the kid that beat me was hit by a car and mangled. So from there we moved to Torrance. Torrance was surrounded by thousands of oil wells, and that was our after school and weekend activity was climbing these wells. The derricks were made out of wood, of course, and some of the rungs on the ladders were split and cracked, and I was climbing and pulled a rung away. I fell backwards on top of a tin shed, bounced off into a sump hole, and of course you can't swim in oil. I'm sinking. I thought this is it. And I straddled about a 4-inch pipe, and I held my breath and gradually worked myself up to the side and pulled myself out. That's just south of town here. And I'm walking down Gramercy Street now, pitch black. And as I walked down the middle of Gramercy, mothers were coming out on the porches looking at this monstrosity or whatever you want to call it. And my mother was out on the porch. No one knew who it was. I stopped in front of my house and I just stood there looking at my mother, and she said, Louie? And I said, yeah. About that time my dad came home, and all he had was a gallon of turpentine. And so he cleaned me up good with the turpentine. The turpentine itself was bad enough, but then he put me in a tub of hot water and I turned red like a turnip. So that was my introduction to California. Then I started school in Torrance and began to get in trouble. And finally got to high school, gave the principal a lot of flack. And as I was talking earlier, in those days they were allowed to belt you with a big wide leather strap. And I felt that pretty severely one day, and I got home and my mother and my dad said, what happened to you? You're black and blue all over. I said, the principal spanked me with a leather strap. He said, what did you do? When I told my dad what I did, he bent me over his knee and spanked me again. I never did it again. I was cured of that. The principal of the school had a particular interest in me because I was in trouble almost constantly, so he called my older brother and he said, you know, if we can get your brother out for athletics, that might keep him too busy to get in trouble. So they put me in the interclass track meet. I went out on the field and came in last. And I swore I'd never get on the track again. I suffered too much, the pains of exhaustion. I made the mistake of starting my smoking at 5 years of age. And I decided this wasn't for me. A week later, dual meet with Narbonne, they got me out on the track again. I said, well, this'll be it, my last race. I'll never touch the track again. And as I came down the stretch and passed a member of the Narbonne track team, I could hear the students from this school cheering me on, you know, and this was unbelievable. I had no idea that anyone even knew my name, and they were hollering, "Come on, Louis." Well, that did it. I made my mind up that night to stop all this dissipation and become a runner. And so this was the first great problem in my life that I had to overcome, and that was the transition from an errant, undisciplined and dissipated teenager to a highly self-disciplined athlete. And once into running, I began to set my goals. I wanted to break the world's high school mile record. I wanted to break the national collegiate mile record for a very emotional reason. And then I wanted to make the 1940 Tokyo Olympics. Now you notice I skipped the 36th Olympics because I felt I was too young and inexperienced to make the team. There were 5 great milers in the nation, all college graduates, and you have to be in the first 3. Then I had an opportunity to run against the second best 5,000 meter runner in the nation. Now I didn't run against him to make the Olympics, that was out of the question. I just ran against him to see how close I could get to someone who would make the Olympics. And coming down the home stretch, I passed him. And I was heading for the tape, and I ran into a fellow from San Pedro that we were lapping, and I fell, got up, and my opponent now had gotten ahead of me. I had to catch him again, and when we hit the tape, he beat me about an inch. But on the strength of that performance, I was invited to the Olympic tryouts at Randall's Island, New York. The city of Torrance, the businessmen, gave me a suitcase, they gave me shaving gear, cologne, clothing. I mean, this city was behind me 100%. And I had my dad worked for the Southern Pacific Railway, so I had a free ticket once a year anywhere in America. So I took advantage of that, got a train to New York. Took about 4 or 5 days. Got in the 5,000 meters against the world's record holder in the 2 miles, so I had really a lack of self-esteem. I knew I couldn't beat him. I just had to get within the first 3 places to make the team. But the last lap, it was just he and I in front. I looked behind, there was a fellow about 40 yards behind. And I attempted to pass this fellow, the last 220, and he was too smart. He kept me on the outside, so I had to run the outside lane. For the last 220, we came in, and it was called a dead heat. So now I'm on the team, and this was a great thrill to me. When you make the Olympic team, it doesn't make any difference if you get last place in the Olympics. You're a winner. You're on the team. And what a thrill it was to go to Germany, and things have changed. Today they haven't the slightest conception of what I'm talking about. The Olympics wasn't just running and getting in a race and representing your country, it was meeting foreign athletes. Remember now, we traveled by boat and by train. Today these athletes, they see each other every weekend. And so that's not a big thrill anymore, but it was exciting to us to meet athletes from foreign countries. And we would exchange hats and things like that, and get their addresses and write and keep in touch for years to come. Following the Olympics, I came back to enter USC in the fall, and there to run the mile, half mile, 2 mile, and relay, whatever they put me in. Got my NCAA record, and then the 1940 Tokyo Olympics were upon us, and I was training hard for that, and then the news came out that the Olympics were canceled, and so went to war instead. I went into the Army Air Corps the day I left for overseas. The famous Charlie Paddock, the character in Chariots of Fire that was supposed to be beaten from America, Charlie Paddock gave me a Trojan ring for good luck. I ended up in Hawaii, that was our base. Had a number of missions, bombing Wake Island midnight, Christmas Eve, 1942. And with Bombay tank, the longest raid in the history of the war, 4,500 miles with one load of gas, and that was unbelievable. We actually did a dive bombing act over the island. Now this is a heavy bomber, and to use a heavy bomber for dive bombing is something unique. We flew over at 10,000 feet, pulled out at 3,500 feet, and flattened the island, but we had used our wing tank gas first, and the Bombay tanks were still full, so when we pulled up from the dive, the straps that held the tanks on stretched and too far so that the Bombay doors would not close. Confinement. They allowed one native on the island. Now this island is occupied by the Japanese, but there were some natives there. And he insisted on talking to me. And they allowed us to have 20 minutes together. And this guy was a fanatic Trojan follower. He knew every record I broke. He knew every guy on the football team, every score of every game. And then he left and he said, well, unfortunately, Louis, he says, they execute all prisoners taken on this island. And sure enough, I found 9 names engraved on the wall of my cell. It said 9 Marines marooned on Macon Island, August the 12th, 1942. They were part of a famous commando raid under James Roosevelt on the island of Macon, and they actually went ashore at midnight in a surprise attack against the Japanese. But evidently they got fouled up on their timing or direction, didn't show up at the departure point on the beach, and thus back to the safety of the submarine. They were left there stranded, placed in these very cells that we were in, but unfortunately all 9 were killed by decapitation. So we had that to look forward to every morning when we woke up. But finally, on the 43rd day, an officer came in and said, tomorrow you will go to Yokohama as prisoners of war. Finally over, I returned home to face the only problem in my life I could never cope with, and that was the post-war adjustment. I tried out for the 1948 Olympics. I had 2 years now, and I got in fairly good shape, but when I started pushing myself into world-class competition shape, I had a muscle explosion in my canoe. And I began to feel sorry for myself and began to drink a lot with a couple of my my Olympic buddies. The 3 of us used to meet every night. My wife got disgusted, decided not to go with us, and she stayed out of that part of my life. And it just got to the point where she, among teenagers.
Yes.
Well, I had run the 5,000 meters. I gained 14 pounds, by the way, on the boat going over. I'd never seen so much food in my life. And I ate my way across the Atlantic, and I couldn't lose the 14 pounds. So I wasn't really in shape for the final race, but I always had a good kick. So the pace was too fast for me, so there's a bunch, 7 guys up here, and there's about another 7 or 8 of us. The second bunch 50 yards behind, another bunch behind us about 50 yards. And the last lap, I took off from this pack, and I caught the first pack. So I finished with the leaders. And in doing so, it was unbelievable to me. I ran that last quarter in 56 seconds. And I don't think I even ran a quarter of a mile that fast, but anyway, after I took my shower, I came back in the grandstand. The Americans were here. There's a buffer zone of officers here, Goring and Goering and all those, and then there's the box where Hitler was. Well, we had our cameras. Anybody that wanted a picture taken of Hitler had to give it to one of the officers. Then he would want to know your name. Hitler had a great memory. He was there every day at the games. And the story about Jesse Owens is not a true story. I think if you watch the '84 Jesse Owens story, they brought out the truth. That Hitler had shunned Jesse Owens. It wasn't Jesse Owens. It was Cornelius Johnson from Compton. He was the first gold medalist, and Hitler just couldn't believe that the Aryan race hadn't won the high jump. So he was the one that was shunned. So anyway, we gave our cameras to. I gave mine to the skinny guy. What's his name? Goring. And he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Why?" He says, "Hitler wants to know the name of every athlete that has his picture taken." I said, "Well, he wouldn't know me. I didn't win anything." But